Hello everyone. We had started with the policy cycle, and in my earlier video I had discussed about the policy formulation stage, wherein we had discussed how the issues and problems they reach the policy agenda, and we had discussed that it reaches to the policy agenda through the people's representation, through organized pressure groups, and through the voluntary organizations and the mass media. And sometimes the government on their own also frames certain policies. And once these problems are brought on policy agenda, then we decide the objectives, targets and goals. The goals and objectives are set, the strategies are being planned, and then we determine the implementation machinery. Now coming to the next stage, and the next stage is the policy implementation stage. So this is very crucial stage. In order to achieve the policy objectives, we have to see that the policy is implemented with full enthusiasm and commitment. And there has been an assumption in most of our 5-year plans that once the policy is formulated, it will be systematically implemented and the desired results as envisaged by policy makers will follow. So we assume कि एक बार policy बना दी, then and if it is implemented, तो उसके desired results we are going to get. So that are the assumptions behind this policy formulation, but they need not be true. All policies may not be the result of serious commitment to resolve the issues. The political motivations can also influence the policies in such a way that it changes the entire complexion. So we can see that there can be certain problems in implementation. If the policy is not implemented properly, then you will not get the desired results. The goals and objectives may not be achieved. So what can be the reasons or problems in policy implementation? So policies can become very difficult to implement if the implementers are not given the sufficient autonomy and flexibility in carrying out their tasks. So if they do not get power, if they do not get the autonomy and flexibility which is needed, then the policy cannot be implemented properly, because they are the decision maker. So they need some kind of freedom to exercise in implementation. For example, if I simply take an example of this COVID, fine. So we want to reduce the COVID cases. Now the governments, the state government should be given sufficient autonomy. You cannot have the same strict laws coming from the center, because each state has their own problems. Each state has their unique problems. So at state level, these implementers should be given some kind of autonomy and flexibility to implement. So if there is no autonomy or flexibility given to implementers, then it can lead to the problem of implementation. For implementing the policy, you need to have the powers. If you do not get the desired power which is needed to implement, then also there will be a failure in policy implementation. If you cannot enforce, if you do not have power to get this implemented from the people, then it is going to fail. So the people who are going to implement the policies should be given sufficient power to implement them. Lack of professionally skilled and expert people. So policies may be difficult to implement if the bureaucracy does not have necessary professional skills, if they do not have the expertise which is needed to implement the policies. So, bureaucracy must have the experts from different areas of specialization. But if they are not recruited properly, like if there is a lack of recruitment of these expertise, then it will lead to the problem of implementation. Even if you have the professionals who are recruited, but if they do not have the proper trained people, then also there will be a problem of implementation. So you need to train them. Just an example, that when this vaccine will come and it has to be given to the people, then you need trained people. You have to give them training that how this vaccine has to be stored, how this vaccine has to be given. So this is some crude example I am giving. And similarly, in policy implementation also, when you are implementing any policy, you need trained people. If they lack the expertise, then there is a need that you give them the training. So the training programs can be organized for the effective policy implementation. Lack of resources, the financial resources, the personal resources and the technical resources can also lead to failure in implementation. If you do not have appropriate resources which are needed, like this new education policy has come up, various suggestions are being made. If you want to implement it, you need resources. You need to set up certain institutions. You need to set up libraries. You need to set up the laboratories because it is focusing on the skill. And to impart this skill, you need proper laboratories. Do you have that kind of resources? Do you have proper funds? So if you do not have proper funds, if you do not have proper resources, which can be financial resources, which can be technical resources, then also there will be a problem in implementation. The new education policy talks about digital education. Do you have sufficient people who are technically sound to implement this kind of digital learning? So, lack of resources can also lead to problems in implementation. Another problem in policy implementation could be lack of response from target groups. Sometimes people do not take interest in implementation of a program. So the target group for whom it is being meant, if they are not giving proper response, if they are not coming ahead, then also there will be a problem. And similarly, if there is lack of interest in implementation, the implementers are not having that interest to implement them, then there will be a problem. Like the farmer bill, which has come up for the benefit of the farmers. But there is a lack of response from the target group itself. And if you get the opposition from the interest groups like these farmers, we are getting the opposition from the people for whom the farmer bill is meant. So we are not able to implement that farmers bill properly because there is an opposition from the interest group. So these are some of the problems in the implementation of the policy. Lack of sufficient autonomy and flexibility, lack of powers to the implementers, lack of professionally skilled and expert people, lack of resources, inadequate staff, lack of response from target group, lack of interest in implementation, and opposition from interest groups. Now, how do we resolve it? If you want to make your policy to be implemented successfully, then we need to overcome these challenges. we need to overcome these problems. So what can be done? Provide sufficient autonomy and flexibility. As lack of autonomy and flexibility can lead to failure, so the government need to give them the sufficient autonomy and flexibility to implement the policy. Give them powers. Recruit the skilled people who are having the expertise. And if needed, give them proper training which is required. Strengthen bureaucracy. Give proper resources. Make provision for the resources. Make provision for the funds. So, if you do all these things, then maybe you can overcome some of the challenges of the implementation. We can say that effectiveness of policy implementation depends to a great extent on the policy design. So, if the design is proper, then implementation will become smooth. But if there is problem in the design itself, like the farmers, they are raising the issue that there is a problem in the design itself. So we are getting the problem, facing this problem of implementation. So if you take the entire stakeholders in confidence when you are designing the policy, then the policy implementation will become smooth.